in recent days, things have shifted in Ontario. We are now talking about the province actually starting to reopen and what it might look like with more than just a few people out on these streets. The answers to those questions are complicated. Take the Greater Toronto Area with its 6 million people. It will be no simple matter to open up shopping malls, businesses, and office towers while still respecting physical distancing.
We've got their order already packed up and ready to go.
This week, as a first step, Ontario allowed some businesses to offer curbside pickup. Leah Isles was already providing shipping discounts as a way of attracting customers to her gift shop.
Doing what we could to adapt and get people to continue shopping with us and supporting small business.
Many businesses like dental offices remain closed. These days, dentists like Peter and Casa are being fitted for new protective equipment as they prepare for a very different workplace.
So the appearance is going to be quite different. Your dentist, unfortunately, is not going to look the same way as your dentist did.
Tomorrow, the Ontario government is promising more details on the next businesses to reopen. But Ontario's Premier is emphasizing that returning to normal in this province will only happen slowly and cautiously. Dwight Drummond, CBC News, Toronto.
And the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, joins us now from Toronto. Hello, Mayor. Good to see you.
Hey, Rosie.
Thanks for making the time. You heard there Dwight at the end say the Premier was going to announce some details tomorrow. We have a few of the details already. We know that they're going to focus on construction work, and retail shops outside of malls will be some of the first places to see restrictions lifted. What will that do to help Toronto?
Well, I think it'll allow some people to get back to work, and it'll improve the psychology of the city, because you didn't mention that I think they're going to make some moves on things like golf courses and marinas. And while that's not, those aren't meant to be trivial by any means, either in terms of the jobs they represent or anything else, I think it'll make people feel better on the May 2-4 weekend that, some things that they associate with summer and with good news are coming back. The key here is that I don't think it's going to be a huge transformation for this first phase. And I think that's important, because I think the numbers are better, but they're not yet where they need to be in order to have a much more wholesale opening up of the city, which a lot of people, including me, are praying for, but only when the time is right, only when public health says it's the right time to open up on a much broader basis, and when we're ready to deal with issues, like you said, like transit and other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to you earlier today, and you were talking about some of the things you're doing, but you made that appeal yet again about how cities are really economic engines. And I wonder if you are feeling that even more right now, and whether you feel you are being heard by the provincial or federal governments when you make that appeal.
Well, we're making progress on that. But, the fact is, look, I know the Toronto number is better, although I do know that in Vancouver, they're losing 4 to 5 million a week. I think in Calgary, the number is 10 to 15 million a week. Toronto is losing $65 million a week. And as you weaken the cities, you weaken their ability, given that 80% of Canadians live in cities, you weaken the ability of those cities to be at the very foundation of the recovery this country must enjoy and come back as strongly as Premier Higgs said we would, and we could, and we will. But you cannot have weak cities doing that. Toronto alone, and I know it aggravates people in the rest of the country to hear this, but it's a fact. Toronto alone accounts for 20% of the entire economy of this country. So if we're ailing because we're broke and because we're busy cutting transit and cutting, childcare and cutting all kinds of things like that support people in going back to work and making a productive use of themselves, then we are going to be hurting the country. And so I want cities, all of them, from Vancouver to St. John's, to be strong, not to be in a financially perilous state. And that is going to require the provincial and federal governments, starting with the provinces, because they have principal responsibility for the cities, to sit down and sort something out to help us, because we're going to return that many times over into their coffers with revenues from HST, income tax, corporate tax. That's where the money all goes as a result of the success of economies in our cities.
And we've been asking this question for some time, at least here in Ottawa. What is your understanding of how your Premier, my Premier too, the Premier of Ontario, is making that pitch to the federal government? Because if he doesn't have the cash to do it, it has to come from somewhere.
Well, I think he hadn't been making much of a pitch before now, and he was, concerned with other things, keeping the healthcare system going. But today he made a very important statement, which said that we are in the corner of the cities. We understand we have to help. We need the federal government to sit with us in order to find out how we're going to do that, provide that assistance. That was a significant step forward. And I can only hope that he is joined by some of his other colleagues who realize it's in their own self-interest, but it is in the interest of the country that we keep cities healthy, that we make sure they have, they're not trying to dig themselves out of a massive hole. Just if the cities were left on their own to try and pay off these numbers that have come about as a result of the pandemic, it would result in property tax increases of 30, 40, 35%, which is not sustainable for people who are hurting right now. And on the other hand, we would have to massively cut transit. Windsor, I think, as I understand it, have closed their transit system. Now, how can you possibly operate a large city, Windsor, let alone Calgary, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, with a closed transit system? It's preposterous to even think about it. It gets people to work. It gets people to the places they're going to go and spend money and produce a healthy economy. So that's why we need help. And it will be help, as I say, that will pay itself back in a stronger country when we come out of this in fighting form, as I know we can.
Can you give me a sense of what you think Toronto is going to look like over the next couple of months? I know today you were talking about expanding patios for restaurants just to try and get people somewhere to sit so they're physically distant. But take away what the restrictions are now. But if you had to cast your mind forward to, June or July, what do you think Toronto is going to be like?
I think it'll be slightly different in that I think some of the physical distancing requirements will have been relaxed. Instead of having a crowd of 5 people, maybe by then it'll be up to 25 or maybe 50, but it still won't mean we can have the big events, whether it's a Blue Jays game or a Raptors game or even just a good solid Pride Parade. Those things have been canceled. I think you're going to see more people that will be, hopefully by then, back to the patios and restaurants so we can enjoy a semblance of summer, but they'll be sitting in tables quite far apart from each other because they can't be too close. They'll be wearing masks in many cases, I suspect, on transit and in stores. Some stores have already said that. The streets will be more crowded than today, but less crowded than normal. So I think what you'll see is a city that is in a profound transition, as all the Canadian cities will be. And there'll be sort of more life on the streets than you see today, but still not anywhere near back to normal because it's going to take a long time, I think, for the numbers, the public health numbers, to match up to the ability that we can have to live a more normal life, whatever normal means anymore.
Okay, John Tory, thank you so much for making the time, sir. I know you're busy and we really appreciate it here.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
Okay, that's Toronto Mayor John Tory.